think that got you into writing? From serving the nation for helping in making people aware of facts and truths through your books. So how did this journey start, sir?
Well, this journey goes back to school. We had a very good school, fortunately, St. Aloysius. 150 years it's celebrating now. We had a very well stocked library. We had a link with the Commonwealth libraries, and every 6 months whole new set of books would come. And I was a voracious reader. I'd do a book a day. And from then on, I think from my school days itself, I used to win essay competitions, etc., etc. When I joined the army, my initial tenures were in the high altitude areas of Sikkim, Chola, 16,500 feet closer to God. And you had nothing to do the whole day except sit and watch the enemy through the binoculars. And even that used to, get souped up with the clouds, with the snowstorms, blizzards, etc. So then all you could do is sit in your little bunker and shiver and crack your fingers one by one to pass the time. So the best way to pass the time in such places is reading and it's writing. That's when I really took to writing. My first book was published when I was a major, but before that I had started writing in a series of articles in the professional journals, and then I never looked back. And right now I think I'm 37 books down.
Absolutely, sir. More than 35 books, and we are waiting now also for your next books. So, sir, could you please begin by telling us a little about your book, Bose or Gandhi? What made you write it?
Yes, that's right.
What is the inspiration behind this book, sir?
Thank you. One of my greatest heroes has been Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I mean, his personality held a great amount of fascination for me. He was such a larger than life figure. And actually, if you go through his biography, this is a life stranger than fiction. Stranger than fiction. I mean, he's the only leader, who escaped from British custody all across India, into Afghanistan, into Kazakhstan, into the Soviet Union, then went to Moscow, met some of the top intelligence sleuths of the NKVD there, went on to Italy, and from there to Berlin. He spent about 3 years in Berlin, raised the Indische Legion, an Indian brigade from the prisoners of war, and with whom he wanted to fight for India's freedom. But the tide of battle turned. And then, he is put in a submarine. And for 3 months from Germany, he sails all round the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and he comes off the coast of Madagascar, where a Japanese submarine, is come to receive him. And when both the submarines surface, it's a sea state 5 storm. Sea state 5 means 40-foot high waves, 40, 50-foot high waves. And the two captains, they stay apart about by a kilometer. So Bose asked the German captain Müller, why don't you take me close? How the hell can I get to the Japanese submarine? He says, Herr Bose, if I get any closer, the two submarines could bang and we'll both be at the bottom of the sea. So he said, how do I get to the Japanese submarine? He says, all that you've got is that little rubber dingy boat, 3-man boat. And you have to row across a kilometer in this sea storm state 5 to get to the other submarine. So Bose looked at the sea, and then Bose looked at the captain and he asked him, what do you think I should do? The German captain said, he says, Herr Bose, I would advise you to go back.
So I think we've lost you. Is it just us, or sir is paused? I think so.
Little 3-man boat. Many times that boat just vanished in the waves, and the German captain banged his head, this man is gone. The man that I bought 3 months, I got him in an undersea voyage thus far, and he is gone. But he made it to the other boat. He made it to Japan, and from there he re-raised the Indian National Army, and with that he attacked the British in India. He had an army of 60,000, of which 26,000 got killed. 26,000 got killed. And you know, that is 44% of the force. Almost half the force got wiped out. May I remind you that all the casualties that the Indian Army has suffered since independence in the 4 wars with Pakistan, one with China, is about 25,000. So this is 26,000. And that is 25,000 from a force of 13 lakhs. This is 26,000 from a force of 60,000. Just 60,000. That just shows you the enormity of that struggle, the scale of the sacrifice. And yet people tell us, you know, it's like a slap in the face when they tell us that "De di hame azadi bina khadak bina dhal." Ours was a totally non-violent struggle, you know, without a shot being fired. We prevailed by fasts and ahimsa and what have you. It's a great travesty of the truth, and it's a great injustice to the memory of Netaji and the 26,000 men of the Indian National Army who got killed.
Yes, yes, sir. I think that's very true. That so much of what we've read in the history has been, if it has been either manipulated, or at least we've not known one side of the truth. That is very true, because all of us in our history school books, we've never read, you know, in your book, you have cited about the conversation between the British PM and about the then governor of West Bengal. And you've talked about how that conversation was a major revelation in the fact that, you know, finally it was Bose who actually pushed the British out of India. And that is something we never read about. That side of the freedom struggle we never read about. So, sir, do you think, you know, these history books and all of the way we are taught is wrong? And, you know, why do you think this is? That why are we taught from one perspective and not given a total perspective of how the situation is?
Hello?
Yes, yes, sir.
Sorry, your sound went down. Boliye.
Hanji. So, sir, I was asking you, you know, all of this is evidence to the fact that we have not been totally comprehensively taught in our history books the two sides of the coin. We've only been given one perspective, right? So, आपको भी लगता है कि you know, we should change our history books the way they are written? And why do you think they are written in one perspective?
You see, the very unfortunate truth is that the British imperialists, before they left, they were forced to go out only and only because of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and the Azad Hind Fauj. You know, Clement Attlee came to India in the year of the Lord 1956. He met Justice P.B. Chakravarti, who was there.
So I think they've lost you a little.
So I think you're paused.
Crushed, totally crushed. And, you know, you had won the Second World War. Why then, just within a year and a half of winning the Second World War, you left in such a tearing hurry that you made a schmozzle of the partition? He just said 3 words. And those 3 words were Subhash Chandra Bose and Indian National Army. We went only because of him, because he had totally subverted the loyalty of the British Indian Army, which then numbered 25 lakhs, 2.5 million men, all battened, hardened, combat hardened. They had fought the Second World War and against the Germans, the Japanese, and they were combat hardened. There were just 40,000 Gora troops in India. And had these people revolted, the empire was finished.
Very true.
So he said that, you know, when the INA trials took place, the INA may have lost the battles of Imphal, Kohima, but when the INA trials took place, then you know there was a massive rioting broke out in all the cities of India, Calcutta, Delhi, Mumbai. You know, riots broke out in all the major cities of India, and ultimately a mutiny a revolt broke out against the British in the Royal Indian Navy. Out of 80 ships, 79 ships, the sailors revolted. They
Yes.
pulled down the Union Jack and they brought in and they pulled down the Union Jack, pushed up the tricolor, and they went around the streets of Karachi and Mumbai with the street with the portraits of Netaji shouting Jai Hind. That was the end of the Raj. There was subsequently a revolt even in the Indian Army, in the signals at Jabalpur, in the EAB units. And then it said to the Royal Indian Air Force. So the British saw the writing on the wall, and within a year plus of that, they just left in a tearing hurry. You would not have been free had it not been for Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. But
Reconnected.
the ones who were most Anglophile, and I'm very sorry to state that to gain legitimacy, Pandit Nehru and the Congress at that stage, they decided to bury the entire narrative, the historical fact of Netaji and the INA, and they claimed all credit for the freedom only and only upon the non-violent freedom struggle. None of the INA soldiers, officers, men were taken back into the Indian Army. In fact, they were denied their wartime pensions. They were kicked out. They were left to starve. They were treated as traitors. Today, you will not find one mausoleum in India, not one, memorial to those 26,000 INA soldiers who laid down their lives so that you and I could be free. Not one tombstone, right? They carved not a line, they raised not a stone, but they left them alone to their glory, as that poem says.
Yes.
It is. I mean, it hurts. It is a travesty of the truth. It is a distortion of history of a monumental order. The British wanted to be remembered as very noble and benevolent rulers. I'm sorry, they sucked India dry of $45 trillion. There were 8 famines in India, and in the last famine in Bengal, 3.5 million Indians died. That is the truth of the empire. But today we are given that they made railways, they made you pay through your nose for those railways. Please read Shashi Tharoor's account.
Yes.
So we all know the way history has been distorted and where a narrative of peace was then forced down our throats. Oh, India is a peaceful civilization, the land of the Buddha and Ashoka. They have never ever been violent. They have never fought. They have never defended themselves. The entire Kshatriya tradition of India, the Mauryan Empire unified India through force, the Gupta Empire, Vikramaditya, all forgotten. All that we were reminded of was one emperor called Ashoka, who in his last days, after slaughtering a whole lot of people, turned to non-violence and to ahimsa and to Buddhism.
Yes.
It's extremely sad. You read your history books, we are still carrying on with the colonial narratives, with the Aryan invasion theory, when a whole lot of empirical evidence to the contrary has now piled up. You see, so what we did was, we said, let's go by facts, right? And we identified the key decision makers of British India. The key decision makers of British India who were instrumental in taking the decision to free India. Here are these people, these 4. Lord Clement Attlee, the British Prime Minister; Field Marshal Wavell, the Viceroy of India; Field Marshal Claude Auchinleck, the Commander-in-Chief of the British Indian Army and the man who had served longest in the Indian Army; and then, of course, Lord Pethick Lawrence in London, who was Secretary of State for India. And then we identified the governors of the various provinces, of Bengal, KC of Bengal, and Punjab, Northwest Frontier Province, Awadh, etc., etc. and the Director Intelligence Bureau then of the British. Then we sent Dr. Kalyan Dey. Unfortunately, he is no more. He passed away last year. He went to the British archives in London and he did detailed research for 6 months. He took out every letter of these key decision makers, which constitutes empirical first-hand evidence. Empirical first-hand evidence, especially of the Viceroy, especially of the British Commander-in-Chief saying, I cannot hold on more than 18 months. I have just 40,000 British troops. I need 6 more divisions worth of British troops. Where are they? The army is being demobilized. The British soldiers are sick and tired of fighting for 6 years non-stop. They want to go back to their families. I'm sorry. We have 2.5 million Indian soldiers in arms who are combat hardened. And they have now officers who have reached the rank of Colonel, and Cariappa had reached the rank of Brigadier. They can fight. They can throw us out. You see, it is in writing, black and white. Emergency plans were made to evacuate British officers and their families the hell out of India. There was a plan called Operation Gondola to get them back to the major, airports and seaports, where the British troops would form a ring and fight a rearguard action with the Indians, revolting soldiers, as the British would be flown out or shipped out, the officers and their families. That was the state.
Yes. And
so now it's there in black and white. Black and white.
Yes, you've provided so much of evidence in your book in terms of letters, in terms of all the archives that you exploited in London. So that has been very instrumental. And I feel these are the kind of books that we need so that we can change our mindset or at least have a complete perspective. So thank you so much for that. My next question to you would be, you've talked very passionately, of course, about Bose, and you've also mentioned about Gandhiji's role in the freedom movement, that at least till 1942 he was very successful in bringing the whole country together in some sort of way. So I would like to ask you about your opinion between the relationship between Bose and Gandhi. What do you think about that?
Look, let me be quite objective and stick to the facts. The simple fact is that it is Mahatma Gandhi who turned the freedom movement from an elite club of very rich Anglophile lawyers who would get together to write petitions to His Majesty the King Emperor in such, sickeningly, what is called, demeaning terms. We, the loyal subjects of His Eminence, the Emperor of India, and etc., etc. It's smacked of licking shoes, boots.
Yes.
And they would do that. And if you read some of those letters today, as a self-respecting citizen, your skin will crawl. Then Gandhiji, when he came in at the time of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and then he started trying to spread the freedom movement from the cities to the countryside. He involved the peasants of India, to make it into a mass-based movement. That was his greatest, most stellar contribution. But the method he chose was non-violence, non-cooperation, civil disobedience. Now, this was able to generate a certain amount of psychological pressure, but never of an order, mark my words, never of an order which would force the British to leave. South Africa followed this same path. The British advocated this path to all their colonial subjects. This is the way, to petition us, to plead with us, and only then we'll let you go, etc., etc. When South Africa got its freedom? In 1994. This is when you would have gotten your freedom had you continued with the non-violent methods of Gandhi. And I'm very sorry to state, it may hurt a few people, but very cleverly the British intelligence, the British MI5, they tried to unwittingly exploit Gandhi's penchant for non-violence. They said, as long as he keeps India non-violent, we will not be forced to leave. We are quite happy with this kind of struggle, which gives us, puts a halo on our heads. Oh, what nice people, liberal, etc., etc., etc. And we won't have to go. So nobody has gotten a greater PR build-up during the British Empire than Gandhi. Not only in India, in South Africa, Africa, Southeast Asia, he was a larger-than-life figure elevated by the British press to kind of, promote non-violence because they were dead scared of an 1857 style uprising. And it is only when that kind of an uprising now happened militarily. Both saw through this. And, he and Gandhi initially clashed on the methods of the freedom movement. And he said they will not go unless they are forced to go. The Second World War is on. It is our greatest and only opportunity to get freedom. Because my enemy's enemy is my friend. This is Chanakya Niti.
Yes.
This is real politics. Forget all the high sounding, oh, we love them and they love us. They didn't. They just saw about 20 million Indians dead. They just looted you of 45 trillion. They didn't love you or they didn't have any concern for you. They just exploited the daylights out of you. And to be so mushy about the British Raj and, so grateful and nostalgic to it, etc., etc., I thought was horrible. But you know what the historical fact is? Gandhiji forced, Bose had become the president of the National Congress. The next term he wanted to stand again and Gandhiji opposed him. Bose was still elected the president. He's the only guy who could defy the diktats of Gandhi and get elected the president, but then Gandhi did not let him function. So Bose had no option but to leave India. But when he left India, and this is a fact that is not very much known. When he left India and he went outside and he raised the Indian National Army to fight for the liberation of India, Gandhiji was now getting convinced when he saw the British stonewalling tactics that they would not give you home rule. After First World War, we had expected gratitude from the British because we had sent, 13 lakh soldiers to fight for the British. 80,000 had died. What did we get? Jallianwala Bagh, the massacre of Jallianwala Bagh, right? And to have expected great gratitude from the British after the Second World War was absolutely a chimerical enterprise. Gandhiji understood. And towards the end, they were on the same page. The Mahatma, it is Netaji who called him father of the nation.
Yes.
And Mahatma Gandhi said, Bose was right. They will not go. That is why Gandhiji launched on Bose's prodding. Bose used to give, broadcasts from Tokyo. And he used to address Gandhiji directly.
Yes.
So he used to listen to those broadcasts on Bose's prodding. Mahatma Gandhi launched the Quit India movement. The entire Congress Working Committee at that time, Nehru, Maulana Azad, etc., etc., they all, voted against it, launching the Quit India movement, right? And it is Gandhiji who overruled them and he launched it. The British were ruthless in their repression. Ruthless, right? 57 Gora Paltan. They did not use Indian forces because the war was on. And they did not want to inflame Indian troops. They did not want to risk that. They used Gora Paltans, the British, the Australians, the New Zealanders, etc., the Canadians, and they crushed it. Every single Indian leader was put behind the bars. Gandhiji went on a hunger strike in jail. And from there, Churchill said, let him die. Why is he not dead? That is the time Kasturba Gandhi, she died. This broke Gandhiji and people advised him, don't do this, Gandhiji. We need you. For God's sake, break your fast because this Churchill will not listen. Non-violence can only be with people who respect that sensitivity, right? Not with a war leader like Churchill. You can't do non-violence with Hitler or Stalin. Try it. You get slaughtered. And that is precisely what happened. The non-violent movement was crushed. And then it was left only and only to Netaji to give that final push that actually catalyzed your freedom, got you freedom. I'm not decrying the organizational work, the mobilization, mass mobilization that was done by Gandhiji. I'm just telling you the historical fact that the British left only and only because of this man and his INA. Otherwise, as per the British testimony, please ask the Brits, please read their documents, please read their archives. It is pathetic that 74 years after independence, none of our scholars bothered to go through the archives. Bipin Chandra Pal writes a 640-page book on the freedom struggle of India. And you know how many pages he devotes to Netaji and the INA? Just guess. 1.5. Thank God for that half page. Otherwise, he would have been reduced to 1 page, a bloody footnote in Indian history. Is that fair? I ask you. Now you know the truth. Now you know the truth. You got any doubts? Let any historical scholar come. Because in my book, I have not cited, I have not quoted those sources. We have photocopied them and attached them to the books in the original. All right? In the original. I'm also a PhD, by the way. I am a scholar. I have done my MPhil. I know my research methodology. All right? I've taught at various military institutions. I'm saying let any scholar of history in this country, it's an open challenge. You want to engage with us in a debate? Do so. You want to come and check facts? Do so. But go by the facts. Don't spin yarns. Don't do spin doctoring. Don't give us contrived narratives and stories designed to further the interests of a particular family. This country is more than a family. All right? And when a country refuses to acknowledge the sacrifice of its martyrs, right? In a very pejorative tone, let me just tell you as a soldier, we respect those who have the courage of conviction to lay their lives down for what they believe to be true and holy. Their country. I've seen so many good soldiers die on the battlefield, to my right, to my left. Right? We have little respect for people who tell us कि हमने लाठी खाई. लाठी तो हमारी भैंस भी खाती है. उसके बाद आपने आके जितनी चोरी करी है, डकैती करी है. I mean, the whole world knows what a corrupt leadership we threw up for ourselves. Because it had not been tested by the fire of real sacrifice, okay? Real sacrifice. Going to jail and asking for special conditions and a Western style loo to crap in and newspapers to read is not sacrifice, please. It's a farce. The real sacrifice was on the battlefields of Kohima and Imphal, where they died. 26,000 of them died. Miserable deaths, malaria, snake bite, the British bombers, artillery, shrapnel, mines. Yet they sacrificed, and the way they fought is amazing, is amazing. I've written another book on that entire battles and struggles by the British, by the Indian National Army against the British Indian Army, against their own kith and kin, and against the British, the Americans, the Australians, etc., etc., etc. They gave them a run for their money. And if you are free, let me just sum it up. If you are free today, if when you go outside the Gymkhana club, you don't find a board which says Indians and dogs. Get that right. Indians and dogs not allowed. Outside DSOI, outside Gymkhana club, outside all your famous clubs of British India, you had boards, Indians and dogs, Bhartiya or Kutte, andar nahi aa sakte. That was the great Raj that some of us hanker for. I rest my case. I'll be happy to take on any questions and answers that you may have.
So hats off to you, sir. All these while, we've grown up seeing so much of passion in you, sir. So much in passion about Bose, the way you argue your cases on TV. It's, it gives us goosebumps and we feel so motivated to do something for our country. So where did all this passion start from? I mean, I've always seen you so passionate about what you feel is right, sir. So where did it all come in?
Look, I had an elder brother who was 23 years old. He was a captain in the Indian Army in the 11th Battalion, the Jammu and Kashmir Rifles. In the 1965 war, he was blasted to bits by a mine. He died. And after that, I joined the NDA the very next year. Right, the very next year, I was in the National Defense Academy. I have served for 37 years one of the greatest institutions of the world, the Indian Army. And the passion comes from there, the service comes from there, the ethos, the credo of service before self, the Chetwood motto puts it down in golden letters. Your country comes first, always and every time. Actually it says the safety, honor and welfare of your country comes first, always and every time. The honor and welfare of the men you command comes next. Your own ease, comfort and safety come last, always and every time. This is the ethos we all learned at the National Defense Academy, at the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun. And then I joined the infantry, my brother's regiment, my father's regiment, Jammu and Kashmir Rifles. I rose to command its 6th Battalion, which is one of the most decorated outfits in this army. And then I fought in one battle after another. My batch was commissioned in the 71 war, 1 month before the war. We took part as second lieutenant. On the very first day of service, we were in battle. Many of my friends and batchmates, their parents got their first pension before they got their first pay. They were killed on the first night of service itself. So the intensity comes from there. The intensity comes from watching your comrades die in front of your eyes while you hold their hands, and that boy breathes his last, asking for a sip of water. That intensity comes from the men that you have seen lay down their lives for this country. So to us, this country is not a piece of the earth. It is an emotion, sacred, overpowering, overwhelming. The intensity comes from there.
Sir, I have to say on behalf of everyone present here, thank you so much for your service. All of us are very proud that you are here amongst us today. And I have goosebumps personally listening to you face to face right now. And we have a lot of questions coming in. I would like to request Mr. Atul Kulkarni to please unmute yourself.
So Mr. Atul, he's a social activist and he has focused on character building. He would like to ask a question from you, sir. Atul ji.
Sir, सबसे पहले तो आपको प्रणाम. 2-3 बार आपसे पर्सनली मिलने का मौका मिला है, तो आपके साथ जितना भी समय व्यतीत करे बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिलता है. मेरा प्रश्न, ये जो बोस और गांधी ये कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है और फिर एक नैरेटिव जो किया गया है, मैं उससे थोड़ा आगे जाना चाहता हूँ, क्योंकि एंड सिंस यू आर स्ट्रेटेजिस्ट ऑन डिफेंस, I'm actually taking you to a further narrative, and that is the Battle of Imphal and Kohima actually changed the course of the Second World War. We all know what happened there, and what it actually did is that a part of our country was kind of cut away. Equal part was mentally got cut away. I'm sure many of us listening are understanding what I am saying. What happened during that 42, 44, that 2.5 years period is is that Britishers demolished the entire infrastructure and the logistic support that was available in the eastern part of our country. 50 years since their independence, Bangladesh has not been able to build a single port or a facility of that scale. And we are seeing the challenges that our entire Northeast is facing because of that. My question, therefore, is how strategic was that move of Netaji move from Singapore to East India, I mean, to eastern part of India, to through Myanmar and into Mizoram, Meghalaya, heading to Nagaland. In your opinion, looking back, what do you think of that entire, I mean, march?
Yes, good question. I'm glad there are people who are interested in military history. Look, the Japanese in 42, 43 were on a winning spree.
Before you answer, I mean, I have a small secondary part of it.
Can I take it
also.
after that? Because unless it is related.
It is related. It is related. My question is your book, the Indian Samurai on Netaji, also talks about the mistake Japanese made by not allowing Indian National Army to lead the front and only use them as a support. And that's where probably they had a mistake, and that's what you've said in your book. So I would like you to throw some light on that also, because that is relevant.
It is. It is. You see, let me put it in a bit of a perspective. You know, when the Japanese entered the Second World War, they entered with a bang. You know, they did Pearl Harbor, they caught the Americans by complete surprise, and they sank the entire battleship fleet of the Americans. It was fortunate for the Americans that their aircraft carriers were not there. Otherwise, the entire American Navy would have been disabled in one blow. And then they turned their attention to the British Empire in the east. And then, you know, as you know, they first attacked Malaya and they just blitzkrieg through it. Then they attacked Singapore. Singapore surrendered. That is where about 40,000 Indian prisoners came to the Japanese, and they, you know, handed them over to Netaji to form the Indian National Army. And then they attacked Burma. 43 they attacked Burma, 1943. And that operation proceeded much better than it had been planned. 2 months ahead of schedule, they had reached the Indian border. That is the time a number of Japanese staff officers, and that is the time even Netaji and the INA were urging, let's go for India. And that is the time the Japanese hesitated, because they had taken on China up north, and it's such a huge country that they had gotten bogged down. And now to get into India and bogged down in another one of the giants of Asia, they were hesitant, and they hesitated, and they lost a golden opportunity, right? Had they attacked then, they would have gone like a knife through butter, because that is the time 42, 43, the Quit India movement had taken place. The British were in a panic. They thought the Japanese would come in through Bangladesh, what is now Bangladesh, right? What is now Bangladesh, and therefore, you know, they dismantled all the ports, they destroyed the entire inland water transport in the Bengal hinterland, so that the Japanese would not use them to come up those rivers and invade and come towards Calcutta, etc. It is because of that that the famine of Bengal 1943 took place, because those were the boats which were used to supply rice and grain to the entire whole of Bengal. There were less of roads and more of riverine transport. And on the orders of Churchill, every single one of those boats and barges was destroyed. This is the kind of damage that they did to the Northeast, from which we haven't recovered to this date. And the famine, the great famine of India, took 3.5 billion lives. 35 crore people died. All right. 35 crore people died, and the simple fact is, 3.5 crore people died, and the simple fact is that even while they were dying, grain was being exported, rice was being exported from India to Great Britain. So the Japanese did not come in then. Had they come in then, the whole game would have been over. They would have reached New Delhi and put the flag on the Red Fort along with the Indian National Army. The Indian National Army, this attack came in, it was too little too late, because by the time of 1944, when the attack actually came in, the Americans had entered the war in a big way. Japan had lost air supremacy. They had to divert a whole lot of resources towards the Pacific. The Burma theater had become the orphaned theater. All the resources had been pushed out to the Pacific to stop the Americans. And therefore, what went into this attack was much less than would have gone. And the British by that time had the time to regain their breath, to re-raise the British Indian Army, raise it to the strength of 2.5 million men, the largest all-volunteer force in the history of India. And even because of air power. And even then, it was 19-20 ka farak. It was touch and go. It is one of the hardest fought battles of the British Empire. One of the hardest fought battles of history. Okay? It's not such a easy victory for the British. It could easily have turned this way had the Japanese made a dash for Dimapur. It was all over for the British.
No, do you therefore see a kind of similar fear that even Hitler had when he kind of backed out and Netaji had to then take that submarine journey which you referred to? I think because he was also not sure whether he can handle that theater all the way from Germany.
Absolutely. You see, he was trying to come towards
Western theater.
He was trying to come towards India from Russia. He would have entered Central Asia, and from there we would have come via Afghanistan. That was the German plan. But you know what happened to their initial successes? They almost reached the gates of Moscow. But from them they were relentlessly pushed back, yard by bloody yard, in one of the most titanic struggles of the Second World War. So he knew there was no way that Bose could have come to India via Central Asia. That route was closed. Therefore, you know, the Japanese were asking for him because they needed Bose. They needed Bose, and they got Bose, and with this, they mounted that offensive. Initially, you know, the point that you raised, that the Japanese wanted to use them for reconnaissance, for psychological operations, for this thing, because they were not sure how well the Indians would fight. Netaji was very upset, and the Indians were very upset that we were not given independent theaters to fight, not given independent fronts to handle, but we were placed under Japanese formation and we were sent in last. But when the retreat started, Netaji had said, you give us independent sectors, we will show you what we can do. And let me tell you that the fight that they put up on the Irrawaddy, the fight that the INA put up at Mount Popa, any army in the whole wide world can be bloody well proud of that kind of fight. And that is why the British wanted to hand Colonel Dhillon, Colonel Shahnawaz and Colonel Prem Sehgal, because they put up such a terrific fight against the British, even when they knew there was no hope. When there was no hope, they were retreating all the way in retreat, not heading towards home, but away from home. That is a great saga of courage and sacrifice and pure grit. Pure grit.
Amazing, sir. Next we have Gauri Mehendiratha. She is an art educator from Delhi Public Schools, Sector 19, Faridabad. Gauri, please unmute yourself.
Namaskar, sir. It's a privilege to have you face to face, to hear you, sir. So thanks so much, Neeta and Shreya, for giving us this opportunity. So my question to you is, the term non-violence is synonymous with peace. But unfortunately, it is frequently equated with passivity and pacifism. It's, according to me, as far as my this goes, intelligence goes, non-violence refers to the absence of violence, and it is always the choice to do no harm or least harm possible, while passivity is the choice to do nothing. So at times, it becomes quite confusing for people like me, this contradiction about non-violence, harmlessness, and passivity. Don't you think that in a world which is armed to its teeth with nuclear weapons, every quarrel or difference of opinion may lead to violence of a kind? So I would like you to, give your take on this. Thank you.
Thank you. You see, that you have raised is not new. It goes back to the time of the Mahabharata when the Gita was preached. And what does the Gita say? When the choice between violence and non-violence. You remember that Arjun, one of the greatest warriors of his time, at the start of the Kurukshetra war, he says, take me between the two armies that are arrayed. Let me see who's there. Who do I have to fight? And then when he saw his uncle, his grandfather, his guru and etc., he said, हम किस लिए लड़ रहे हैं? राज के लिए, it is better to die than to do this. I will not fight. I don't want to do this violence. And you know what Shri Krishna told him? Look, Arjun, if you don't kill them, they are going to kill you. They'll slaughter you. You see, non-violence works with people, like I said, who are sensitive, who are liberal, who are kind-hearted, and who will not slaughter people who are unarmed. Do you know the Indian history of the last 8 centuries? Do you know of the invasions of Mahmud, Ghazni and Ghori? Would you have advocated non-violence in any case? You see, look at the way we were routed. Look at the way they slaughtered. Not the soldiers, the unarmed civilian population. I mean, they burnt our cities, they burnt our libraries, our universities, they looted our temples, they raped our women, they carried them off to be sold in the brothels of Samarkand and Bukhara. Would you be non-violent then? I ask you. If it is an ideal world, we can practice non-violence, right? We would like to do the least amount of damage to somebody else. But if that somebody else, if the other is somebody who would like to slaughter you, rape your wife and daughter, murder you, would you practice non-violence? Gandhiji said that is rank cowardice. And let me give you a little more historical perspective. After the Second World War, the Americans, the British, they went out of their way to see that two fighting people, the Germans and the Japanese, would be absolutely neutered. They would be made non-violent so that they would not be a threat to the world again. Today, Japan and Germany have armies, but they haven't really fought. You know, a similar thing was done to India. The British were masters of psychological warfare. They were shaken by the 1857 revolt, in which about 80,000 Indians had taken part. 80,000 Indian soldiers, right? They were shaken by that revolt, the intensity of that revolt. And they said, never again will we let them come together. So they firstly decided to use every fault line in Indian society to divide and rule. Caste, creed, language, ethnicity, race. They divided you and they ruled you. And then they sold to you this thing that you Indians are non-violent. Mahatma Gandhi is absolutely right. He is non-violent. Be non-violent. The problem is when after independence, you say, oh, what role did violence play? No role at all. It was all non-violence. You fool yourself. You fool yourself. And how many times have you been invaded after independence? 4 times by Pakistan, once by China, and now China and Pakistan are both like Hainan on your borders, waiting to strike, waiting to do you in. You still would like to preach non-violence? I'm afraid it will be another name for rank cowardice. Cowardice. There's nothing good about not defending yourself. There's nothing good about not defending your wife and children and your home and hearth. And it is this philosophy. Why am I writing this book? Why are people telling me, "Aap gade murde kyun ukhad rahe?" Because you have to change your mindset. A country that has been invaded, pillaged, raped, looted, murdered for 8 centuries, your answer is non-violence? You will invite more violence. You will invite more trouble. You will invite more invasions because, this is unfortunately not an ideal world. There are people out there, the Chinese, the Pakistanis, the Afghans, etc., who would, with happiness, loot your wealth again. Rape your women, burn your cities, destroy your temples. The University of Nalanda burnt for 6 months. You want that to happen again? I rest my case.
I think you're very right, sir, when you talk about defending not only yourself, because in this fight, we have to remember Gandhiji was not only defending himself, he was defending a whole nation. There was a whole nation behind him. So it was very important not just to have a non-violent strategy. So I agree with you. So the next question I think we have from Mrs. Asha Dahiya.
Yes, she's from DPS Greater Faridabad. She's a political science teacher.
It's a privilege, sir, to listen to you today and to get an opportunity to talk to you today, sir. My question to you, sir, is while teaching my lessons to the students, talking about these two personalities, Gandhi and Bose, both belonging to a contradictory, a conflicting school of thought, right? It at times poses a great challenge for me to keep, if not neutral, a balanced approach. Right? And at least I avoid taking sides, right? Otherwise, I would be blamed of shaping opinion among the children, right?
Right.
So while writing this book, sir, my question to you is, like your title has the name of these two personalities. So
That's
did
right.
you also face this balanced approach kind of challenge, whether to take side or not, or how to keep balance and how to present these two conflicting school of thoughts in one book? At one place?
You see, the trigger for this book, I have not based it on the facts which are there in your history books. We went beyond those books. We went to the pristine original sources. We had very, very, pertinent research conducted in the British Transfer of Power archives to identify the key decision makers, what they said and what they did, what they thought was all there, recorded in their letters, in their reports, their estimates of the situation, in their appreciation of the situation. One of the best documents is an appreciation of the situation in India by Field Marshal Claude Auchinleck, the Commander-in-Chief India. It's about a 30-page document. I think every Indian must read this who is interested in the truth. And we were shocked that the truth that emerged from there was 180 degrees the exact opposite of the narrative being peddled in our official history books.
True.
Written by a bunch of court historians, and I would now call them court jesters.
Right.
And that's what I say. Please see the facts for once for yourself. The Buddha says, "Oh monks, don't believe me because I say so. Don't believe because the wife says so. Test for yourself. Go through those British archives. We have selected them all. You don't have to wade through thousands and thousands of pages. All the relevant pages we have photocopied and attached to these books. There's my book.
Yeah.
There is Professor Kalyan Dey's book, which has just recently been released by the Vice President. Can we, for God's sake, as scholars, read those books and then tell people to come to their own conclusions?
Right.
So it's not a matter of, I respect him and I respect him, and therefore I will say nothing that hurts anybody's feelings. I have to go by what the truth is. Where we are going depends a lot on where we came from, where you are headed as a nation state. Till 1962, we followed that Gandhian policy of non-violence, ahimsa, panchashila. What a kick we got from the Chinese. What a kick we got from the Chinese. It was a wake-up call. After that, very few people in authority have spoken of non-violence, all right? Because they realize the consequences. The Westphalian system of nation states is premised upon the basis of hard power, upon the state having the monopoly of force and violence. It is a system based upon violence. How can you be a non-violent state and hope to survive? You think the others will let you survive? You disband your forces and you see what Pakistan does tomorrow. They'll teach you non-violence here. You disband your armed forces as Nehru wanted to do, and you see what the Chinese do to you. You would be a slave country, a colony. Why? It's amazing. We want to philosophize, and I'm very sorry. Half the time the philosophizing comes from rank cowardice, unwillingness to stand up for what is right and fight to defend yourself, to defend your family, your country. I mean, don't give me that baloney. Because I have seen people having to die to defend you. Die. Shut up. I have seen people with their intestines spilling out. 23 feet of the chota intestine and 11 feet of the long intestine. Spilling out. You see, it takes courage to fight. And this non-violent, non-falutin, all that kind of highfalutin philosophical drama. I'm sorry. It does not work in the real world. And you open your countrymen to grievous harm if you follow a pernicious philosophy for this. Therefore, the battle is for the battle of the minds. The battle of the right ideology which should guide this nation state. Is it the ideology of this man or this man? This man was a realist, and if you go by results, what he said proved right. He was idealistic, he was a great saint, I have the greatest of respect for him, but it did not work.
Right.
So binaries are fine, but then we have to look for what is right and not for balancing out, for the sake of not hurting anybody's feelings. Because I would rather that some feelings are hurt and bruised, but our people are safe, our women are safe, our children are safe, our country is safe.
Thank you, sir.
Made us all very emotional, and I don't know how to put it in words right now. So we have Niranjan Pandit. He's an IT consultant, and he's been wanting to ask you a question. Niranjan, please unmute yourself.
Your voice is
Mute.
not audible, Niranjan. You're still not audible. I think we can circle back to you because I think you're not audible. There's some.
Just press that mic symbol.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. It's an honor, sir. It's an honor to be part of this discussion, and I'm grateful for all the knowledge and wisdom that you're sharing with us. Sir, my simple question was, as rightly you said, that it was a psychological warfare that is still being played by the anti-India brigade to make us always be subdued and be under the dogma of fear of hinsa. So if you fight back and if you rightfully claim your justice, then suddenly you become a violent person, and suddenly you are put on that cap of a violent person. And then this is the psychological warfare that was being played by British. And the other side of the question is that since this Gandhiism that was so much marketed by the British people since 1945, and they said that it was because of that we got independence, I would like to know all the champions of Ahimsa and Gandhiism as to when did British themselves follow Gandhiism? Is there any occasion in the history wherein British were attacked and in the response they thanked or they said, oh, thank you, just slap me on the face? There is no such case event in entire history, or rather British or US or any, when they were attacked and they followed Gandhiism, that they are so rightfully teaching us and asking the Indians to follow.
That precisely is the point. You hit the nail bang on the head. You see, the point is, why were the British so enamored of Gandhi's non-violence? Because it suited them to the hilt. Unwittingly, with the best of intentions, Gandhiji was doing precisely what served the British interest. In fact, some people have gone to the extent of calling him an MI5 mole. I will not go there because I believe he was very well intentioned. But the way to hell is paved with good intentions. You get that? That is why I am saying, when people tell me, General Bakshi, there is corona, there is so much to do now, we don't have jobs, we don't have this. Why are you harking back on to what happened in 47? Because, sir, what happened in 47 shaped your narratives, shaped your outlook, shaped your philosophy of life, shaped your ideology, shaped your outlook towards national security in a way that was dangerous. It has to be corrected. It has to be corrected. There are a number of people who will now tell you, oh, don't fight with China, don't fight with China, even if they kick you in your butt. Don't fight with China because they have nuclear weapons. And look, so you have to choose. You want to be kicked around, you want to be pushed around, you want your land taken, and you keep giving. You will not be able to buy peace. You will only invite more aggression. 62, the Chinese kicked you. 65, Pakistan thought, if the Chinese can kick them, why not I? ये तो धोती वाले हैं, ये तो फलाने हैं, दुकानदार हैं, ये थोड़ी ना कुछ करेंगे. And he kicked you then.
Sir, I would like this question to be asked in some forum as to please quote an example from the entire British history or Australian history or French history.
Canadian or American?
Or American, that you were attacked and you followed Gandhiism and you said, thank you, please slap me on the face. There is not a single example.
That is precisely what I'm saying. What is sauce for the goose is not sauce for the gander.
Yes.
What is being preached to Indians was not what was being practiced by the British when they fought World War I and World War II for liberty, fraternity, equality.
Absolutely.
And to you, oh, you are supposed to be non-violent. You are supposed to be goody-goody. Turn the other cheek. When I slap you, allow me to slap you a second time. So I think we've been taken for a ride long enough.
Thank you, Niranjan.
Sir, I have one more. So anybody who says that whenever you are slapped on, I'm sorry.
Yes. Could you, I think your audio is not clear.
Okay, is it clear now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to have another point raised whenever somebody says the point of Gandhiism that when you have slapped on one cheek, please put forward another one. I don't know the intentions of the person or when Mahatma preached this, but can this be followed in today's times when girls are mercilessly being murdered, raped, and butchered up? If one of your relative women falls to becomes such victim, would you send in another woman so that the person who is doing this, his happiness, his pleasure is satisfied? Could you please follow the principle of forwarding another chick when one of your women in the family is molested?
Assaulted.
Can you do that?
May I just can I just interject? May I just remind you that we have this: if somebody slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. You know what is the Chinese equivalent saying? If a man slaps you once, it is his mistake. But if he slaps you twice, it's your mistake. Because if he slaps you once, you'll thrash the daylights out of him. But if he slaps you twice, that means you must have done something wrong. that you have been caught out and you are tamely taking a beating. So this shows the world of a difference between the two outlooks. What we are fighting for in the armed forces is a change in the outlook. A country must learn to
Yes.
defend itself, its values, its freedom, its ideology.
Yes.
Otherwise, it
Yes,
will
sir. Yes,
perish.
sir.
Yes.
Thank you, Niranjan. A very, very
Thanks a
valid question. Now we have Alka Khanna. She's a businesswoman. Alka, your question, please.
Yeah. General Bakshi, I'm a huge fan of the whole Indian Army, and there are a handful of you who are really connecting us to the past. And I believe that if we know how hard we've been hit, we should strike back more stronger so that, but my concern and main concern now is the youth know, because you all are informing them, how can the government help in shaping the youth? Because I think they need a direction. Can
Absolutely
we
right.
also come under the army for training during the school or something? Is there some talk like this, like some other countries? Because I feel the youth of our country are totally wayward. They don't know what is going on. And Ahimsa, or even doing these, what do you call the Shaheen Bagh dramas, they don't happen in today's world. That is nonsense. So how to
Absolutely.
go about for a better future for India? Because psychologically, mentally, we must be ready for the change and know our true value, not be just undermined like what people have been trying to preach us all this while.
Thank you. Thank you for that very relevant question. You see, that is why, as a military historian, I am a great advocate of the fact that first of all, you must know your history. You go and take up American citizenship, and they make sure you know American history before you become a citizen there. They hold test to see whether you learned American history or not, because the values flow from there. So first of all, we must know our history, and to read a history that is worth reading, it must be a history
true.
without
That is true.
biases, narratives, distortions,
Yes.
and stories. So the first thing that you will do, the first thing that will make you proud and patriotic is that I know my country's history. The history of this country goes 10,000 years, not by the saying of some leader of some shaka here or there, but by empirical carbon dating of the ruins of the Saraswati River civilization, fluoride dating, sonoluminescence dating, scientific methods. Take your history back to almost 9,500, 10,000 years, right? So you have so much to be proud of, because you are the only living civilization which, despite being invaded, pillaged, raped, looted, murdered, is still more or less the same as it was. You know, in the Indus Valley civilization, the girls had bindis. We have
Yes,
terracotta
yes.
dolls with bindi in the
Yes.
forehead, central parting with sindoor, bangles on their hand, jewelry like what we have today. The bullock carts, exact same proportions as are found in the villages of India. Boats of the same design as are found in Gujarat coast today. So the fact of the matter is, there is this continuity, Proto Shiva, Pashupati Nath, Mother Goddess seals, you know, yogic postures. We have found seals of yogic postures. You must know your history to be proud of
But
your
sir,
history.
how
Number
are
one.
you? Can you be all the like Major Gaurav Arya, Sushil Pandit, R.S.N. Singh, Pushpendra Kulshresht? Can you just shape the youth of India, or just help in doing something? Because that makes me very, very nervous. That a lot of time is being wasted.
So no, you are absolutely right. So I was coming to there. The process of building warriors starts in the kindergarten.
Yes.
Starts with the mama holding her baby
Yes.
and telling him he is an Indian, talking to him in the mother tongue. You know, I find most of our kids who go to convent schools and, you know, all highbrow schools, they can't speak Hindi. So you have to go back there and start. And then we try to have the National Cadet Corps to give people, the children of our country, ethos, the military values, the military training. But that's too small. Then a suggestion was made that military training should be made compulsory.
Yes, that is.
If not for all, at least for those who have to join the IAS, IFS, IPS. So that our rulers have some grounding, you know, in true values, military values of fighting and dying for your country, putting your country first and not your paisa that you get, right? So those things have been tried out, but there are certain practical problems. We have suggested that we have lots of ex-servicemen organizations.
Yes.
I am the one of the founder members, you know, of the patrons of Veterans India, and we are suggesting that if the government can't do it because of expenditure, we would rather have tanks and ammunition and, you know, aircraft to fight the Chinese. And if they don't have that much, because it costs money to set up the NCC infrastructure, instructors, barracks, this thing, trucks, vehicles, etc. are needed. So what we are saying is, let the ex-servicemen form volunteer organizations like the Boy Scouts, like this thing, with a military slant. Azad Hind Fauj. Go to the schools, train the kids in, you know, field craft, in drill, in physical training, martial arts, karate, kung fu, unarmed combat, Krav Maga, boxing, so that you get a warrior mindset.
When
A warrior
we were young,
mindset,
there
a
was
fighting
NCC.
mindset.
When we were
And
young,
you
there was
learn
NCC.
the ethos from old soldiers.
Yes.
Because between the very old and the very young, between my grandchildren and me, there is a special bond. So when you get old soldiers like me to your schools as drill instructors, unarmed combat instructors, sports coaches, etc., you know, from there the ethos will come down. And we want it down to every one of our young men. Today we have the youngest population in the world. 50% Indians are below the age of 25.
Yes.
We will have to militarize their ethic. Make them into Kshatriyas. Kshatriya is not a caste. It is a mindset.
It's
a fighting
Sir, I hope I
mindset.
can see that in my lifetime. I hope I can see this
It's
come
happening.
through in my lifetime.
It's happening. It's happening. Let me assure you.
Yes.
After retirement, I have made it a job to go to every school possible. Talk to the children about a career in the armed forces, about the ethos of the armed forces, about the sacrifices of some of our boys. We have created war comics, Indian war comics, about our Paramveer Chakra winners, about our Mahavir Chakra winners as role models for the children. We have started, we are not just talking. We have made, my son and I, we have made 7 documentaries called Famous Battles of India. These are being shown even today on Epic Channel. We are making much more. We are planning to make war movies.
Sir,
Indian
can you
war
do
movie.
something about the national TV showing so much of Riya Chakravarti instead of a lot of other things?
I think
Well, that's for the viewers. You've given them the highest ratings when they have shown Riya Chakravarti.
Truly,
So-
I have stopped watching TV because of that.
I know.
Totally
Thank you.
devastating to see where our youth is going.
You see, because even there is something to be changed.
Yes,
You
of
see,
course.
let me, because now that you've raised a very important issue, if I can address it. You see, soft power. A country has hard power, it has
Yes.
soft power. Bollywood has tremendous soft power. But you can't hand Bollywood over to a bunch of mafias, gangsters, Dawood Ibrahims. And what is the kind of films they make? Gunde, gangs of Wasipur, Dawn 1, Dawn 2, Dawn 3, every bloody movie on a slumlord, on a drug peddler becomes your national hero?
Yes, I'm so glad
Can
that
you
the
hand
book is
over
coming out.
Bollywood to these people, to drug addicts,
True.
to rapists, smugglers, gang lords, slum wars? Is that what is the highest ideal for this country?
But
Because
I'm
they were
saying
financing your films. So
they
that
should
is
not
why.
be given so much time on the TV, because I think
No,
it's
because now
important.
we are fighting that mafia,
Yes.
that
I'm
coterie.
so glad
Therefore,
about that. Yes.
it has to involve all of us. That
Yes.
when all of us say, yeah, this bloody well will have to stop, then it will
Yes.
stop.
Yes.
And if necessary, if you are a guy who believes in promoting Dawood Ibrahim, we don't see your films, boy. You can shove them where the sun don't shine.
Yes. True.
You know,
Yes.
that's what's happening.
Yes, yes. Very rightly said, sir. And, regarding the discussion about changing the way it is from the beginning, from the school level, we actually have with us a student who would like to ask you a question. And I understand we are way above time. So we'll just take last two questions if it is okay with you, sir.
Yeah, okay.
We have Yuvraj Dingra. Please unmute yourself.
Yes. Yuvraj is a class 11 student from DPS, Greater Faridabad. Yes, Yuvraj.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. First of all, I have a huge respect for you. And first of all, a heartfelt gratitude to all the brave hearts who remain anonymous in the history of a nation. So the question I would like to ask you is that, sir, if you were not a part of the army and military services, would you, as a citizen of the country, would still have delved into the past and taken up such an immense research work to uncover the past? Or has being an army officer provided you with some sense of belonging towards INA and Netaji?
Well, certainly the armed forces have a lot to do with it. Well, I was always the studious kind. You see, I told you that I used to read a book a day. My librarian was very fond of me, that old lady. God bless her. She's still around, and I hope she's around for another till she's 100. She used to give me, we could take 2 books from the library at one time. She used to give me 4 because she knew that I would read them, 1 book a day, and within 3-4 days, those books would be back for circulation. So, I was studious. I would have definitely perhaps been a professor of history if I had not been a soldier. But I don't see myself going any other way. If I had my life all over again, I would again be a soldier. Because not only have I just read books, I have lived it all. I have lived through some of the great battles of this country. 1971 war for the liberation of Bangladesh. I've lived through it. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen the Kargil war. I've fought in the counter-terrorist campaigns in Jammu and Kashmir. It's not theory for me. It's something that I lived through, right? And now we are living through this. I wish I was still in uniform, because a lot of things would have been far more active than they are. Now that they are, because we used to shoot first and look for orders later in my time. So, serving in the military, scholar warriors, that there are great traditions of Sant Sipahi, which is very peculiarly Indian. Guru Gobind Singh was a Sant, he was a saint, he was a Sipahi, he was a scholar. Right? He was a scholar. What does the word samurai mean? It means poet warrior. He was a poet, he's a warrior. He's a historian. All of them are steeped in the history of their country. Vo Nguyen Giap, have you heard this name? General Giap, one Vietnamese general who beat the Japanese, who beat the French, who beat the hell out of the Americans. And then he beat the Chinese. Do you know that he was a history student? That his wife was his professor of history's daughter. And they both became communists at that time to free their country from the French. The French caught hold of his wife and she was tortured to death. This man never remarried, but he never forgave the French. He was called by the French the snow-covered volcano, the professor of history, who created history, who changed history, who fought, who motivated people to fight and die for their country. That's what we are talking of. We want scholar warriors. We want scholar warriors in this country.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for answering that, sir. Regarding the previous question, we had actually a suggestion from Niranjan, who's asked you a question before. He said that maybe we could make military training into the number of years a prerequisite for qualification to right to vote. So he was suggesting that, you know, we can do that.
No, in fact, there is a move on for that. The present government is thinking in terms, there is some loud thinking of about, 3 to 4 years military service, a kind of a short entry cadre. We had the short service commission earlier, and they used to be, excuse some paper or the written exam. They had to go only for the interview. So you found that after 62, 63, a whole lot of emergency commissioned officers reached the IAS, IFS, etc., IPS, and they did extremely well. They did extremely well. Because then they had that perspective. They had seen the battlefield.
Yes.
They knew what it meant to die for the country, to risk your life for your country, to believe in a cause which is far greater than you.
Yes.
And so that your whole philosophy of life is not hedonistic. I, me, myself, me, I want more and more bungalows and flats in the best of condominiums and the best of Mercedes cars and Impalas and what have you. There is something more than that. Ho Nguyen Giap, Ho Chi Minh, when he moved to the French palace, after he became the president, he refused to stay in the palace. He used to stay in the servant quarter of that palace. So these are people who have sacrificed. They are not enamored by all these razzmatazz. And what you learn in the military is the sacrifice ethic.
Absolutely right, sir. Totally motivated today. We have a question from Rekha Chaudhary, one of our last questions, I suppose, last two questions now.
Yeah.
Rekha, she's an entrepreneur and she's been really wanting us to tell you that she wants to ask a question. Yes, Rekha.
Good evening to you, Major General Bakshi. My
Hi,
salute to the Indian Army. So before I ask you my question, I want to say I'm not a pacifist, I'm not a leftist, neither am I a right winger. Just a history buff.
Good.
Yes. So I grew up idolizing Netaji.
Right.
But in last few years, I've read enough and I have had these questions for a very long time, especially about his strategy in an ideology. See, he aligned himself with the Nazi Germans and the fascist Japanese. And he nearly, if the Japanese would have actually won the Kohima war, don't you think they would have replaced the British? So we would have perhaps had a Japanese rule. And again, since 1945 and 1960, there were 36 countries which got independence from the European rulers. So don't you think World War II was a catalyst as far as India's independence is concerned? And neither Bose and nor Gandhiji. So more World War II being a catalyst? What is your thought on that?
Excellent. Now that you are a history student, there are two schools in history. There is the Marxist school and there is the Arnold Toynbee school. I'm sure you are aware of these two schools. The Marxist school says exactly what you are saying. It's not Hitler, it's not Gandhi, it's not Bose. It's not the individuals who make history. It is the forces of history of the Great War, World War I, World War II, that bring about these great changes. And these leaders are just labels, they are named. If Hitler hadn't come, then somebody called Himmler would have come. But they are labels, they are not in themselves the key catalysts. The Arnold Toynbee school is just the exact opposite. They say it is the Julius Caesar, it is the Churchills, it is the Stalins, Hitlers, etc., Mao Zedongs who make history. And when they Go, there are earthquakes. You see, so these are two diametrically opposite schools of thought. Quite very interestingly, in the philosophy of history, in historiography, if you want to so put it, we have an Indian school of history, which is spelt out by the Gita. And I'll just quote that one shloka, Yada yada hi dharmasya, glanir bhavati bharata, abhyutthanam adharmasya. Whenever righteousness declines, whenever there is a condition of crisis, World War I, World War II, Great Depression, COVID-19, then great leaders are thrown up. Okay? Then the Lord incarnates. Yada yada hi dharmasya, glanir bhavati bharata. When the righteousness declines, there is suffering, great challenges from the natural or the social environment. Then great leaders arise to lead the way out of that. So, World War II, you are absolutely right. The forces of the Second World War did create the condition. They exhausted the British Empire. They were left in no shape to fight. Their treasuries were drained, depleted. They owed so much to the Americans. Of course, it played a part. And as far as a great amount of moralization is done, especially by the leftists, against Netaji, Tojo ka kutta, this, that, ye, wo, and all the rest of it. Why did he go to the fascists? Why did he go to the Japanese? Were the British very good to us? Were the British very good to us? 8 famines? And in the last famine alone, 3.5 crore Indians died. They built the railway for you. They charged you 1.5 times what it would have cost otherwise. They made you pay for the railway taxes there, and then they charged you for it. They sold you the equipment. They didn't let you make the equipment here. They were very good to us. They were worse than the fascists, man. They were colonial, imperialist looters. So Chanakya is very clear. My enemy's enemy is my friend. That is called being realist. If you really have to win, if you're not going to fight for the tamasha of it, कि मेरी एक गाल पे चांटा मारा, दूसरा कर दो, मैं तो अहिंसावादी हूँ. I actually don't want you to go. I actually don't want you to go. And when the British were leaving, Nehru as the first Prime Minister, whom does he choose as the first Governor General of independent India, so-called the Dominion of India? Lord Louis Mountbatten. The Pakistanis, who also became a Dominion, had the decency to choose one of their own, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, as the first Governor General of Pakistan. All right? So don't give me this moralizing guilt trip. Oh, he went to Hitler. Oh, he went to Tojo. The fact of the matter is that the INA, they were feisty. They refused to take direct orders from the Japanese. They took orders only and only when they came from Netaji. There is a pamphlet published by the Japanese army telling their soldiers how to deal with these Indians. They are very touchy because they have suffered enough from the British. They don't trust foreigners. He did what he thought was right. And it is because of him that you become free. And he had said, whether Germany wins or Japan wins or Britain wins, India will be free. And India was free. He was a far-sighted strategist. He was realist. All his decisions, strategic decisions. You see, Mao reached the pedestal he did in China because all his strategic thought proved right, far-reaching and right. He was a visionary. So was Netaji. And if you think the British would have gone because of, this chamchagiri that we were doing with the ladles of, लार टपका के आपने जूते चाटने, तलवे चाटने आपको आ गए थे. You have learned that from the Mughal times. The Mughal court, Diwane Aam, Diwane Khas, is 1 kilometer long. and he had to start doing Noor-e Jahan, Noor-e Chashmuddin, etc., etc. You see, we become a nation of liquors, boot liquors. Here, a man like Netaji emerging is a great credit. And I thought he was very realistic, and he was very much bang on the dot. What he visualized came to happen. That is the sign of a visionary leader. And he was precisely that. I rest my case.
Very well said, sir. We've actually already gone a bit over time, but we would like to end our on this very passionate note.
It's been a very emotional and a very passionate session. Even if we can reach 2% of what you are today, sir, I think our life will be made. Today we are inspired, and today we are totally feeling quite patriotic. And thank you so much for this session. We went so much ahead of the time. You never said anything. You were so patient with us, and you took up all the questions. There's some questions which are still left. Maybe I'll message you separately, because there's some people who really want to know a few things more. But I think we have taken so much.
They'll be most welcome to communicate with me. And because the topic is such,
Yes, sir.
I'm not sorry that we have gone beyond time.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
So
sir.
it's been an honor, and what can I say? So your having said yes to come on our forum itself is a big honor for us. We really appreciate. So as soon as the pandemic or lockdown is over, we'd like to call you, invite you to Faridabad for a longer session, and we'll try to do that as soon as it is physically possible.
Thank you.
And we'd like to,
Thank
there's
you.
so many books we can discuss with you. Maybe in near future, we'll come back, sir.
Certainly, certainly. We would. Books have been my passion in life, and my world has been around the books. My idea of heaven would be a vast, unending library with a limitless supply of books. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Jai Hind, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much,
So we
everyone.
salute you, sir, for all your achievements. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for everyone for joining in and
Yes.
for staying for so long. We hope to see you in further all the sessions as well. We have our Instagram page and our FB page, and you can follow us there for any future updates. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Send me the link. I'll share it on my Twitter and Facebook. Because I have about 5 lakhs on Twitter and about 1.5 lakhs on Facebook. So let it reach a wider audience.
Yes, yes.
I'll do that, sir.
Thank you.
Definitely.
We'll try to share it as soon as possible, sir.
We'll edit and send it to you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Goodbye.